Hey everybody, Professor Smith here. I was thinking that some of you might be having a problem, and that problem, I'm assuming, and again, not for all of you, and maybe for none of you, but I know for myself, when I was in your shoes, that at this point, I had a big problem starting. Not the research, that part was easy. I probably spent too much time doing that. Not the thinking of a thesis statement, that probably came relatively easier to me, but the harder part was sitting down and actually getting through something that resembles a paper. What do I write first? For me, as well as for a lot of professional writers in the academic world, in the literature world, and even in the nonfiction essay writing and in newspaper world, outlining and planning are vital steps to writing. When I say vital, I mean like can't live without them type of important. So, how do you go about actually outlining your paper? So, every paper is going to be a little bit different. So, I want to talk specifically about a argumentative research paper. Alright, so before we get into how we outline it, I think it's important for us to first understand the fundamental frameworks of a argumentative research paper, what we're working on. So let's look at that, shall we? If I can get it up. Boom. Okay, so here we go. Now, I brought this up when we talked about our first paper, but because our first paper was a lot more formulaic than this one, formulaic in the sense that for Project 1, a lot of us did the same thing. Even if we all chose our own articles that were different in their own right, there still would have been a lot of similarities in the structure of how we wrote that paper. Because we were all trying to do the same thing, we were just using a different news story, a different vehicle as a means to have that same conversation. For this project, you are going to be focusing on a lot of different things. So as a result, I can't give you as detailed of an outline as I did for Project 1. What I can give you is a general outline, a general structure. I can say to you, this is the type of information that you are going to need to bring into your paper, and this is the rough order in which you should consider doing this. One, we have our intro. Clearly that's going to be with all your papers, right? For a paper, excuse me, for a paper the size that we are working with, your intro should be one paragraph. If you were writing a 20-page paper, maybe you'd have a second paragraph. If you were writing 30 or more, you'd probably have a second or third. By the time you hit like 80, you'd have even more than that. I mean, if you think of any of your textbooks, if you have any this semester, see if it has a foreword or an introduction. How many pages is it? It's quite big usually because it's introducing 500-600 pages. It's introducing a lot of stuff. So for a paper this size, 8 to 10 pages, your introduction should be this one paragraph. Background context. Maybe I should write this to make more sense. Background section, right? So these aren't paragraphs. This isn't a 6-paragraph essay. These are sections. And in the background paragraph section, again, depending on what you're doing in terms of scope and size, all this stuff changes. But for an 8 to 10 page paper, I would say that yours should be between 1 to 3. 1 to 2 probably being most appropriate. 3, you really should be asking yourself, do I need to tell this to people? Is this something people really don't understand? So what is background context? Background context is, how do I put this? Background context is the information that your reader is going to need to know in order to follow along with your paper. So sometimes background context might be defining a term. If I was writing a paper on metaphysics or postmodernism, I might spend one paragraph at the, not the very beginning because I have my intro, but close to the very beginning. I might try and define the term and not just say the dictionary defines it as this blank period paragraph over, but to explain it in 2 or 3 sentences, see if I can find somebody else's explanation, maybe give an example if that makes sense, but to actually spend time really trying to engage my reader, not just engage, but teach my reader, hey, this is what this word means, so when it comes up multiple times in every paragraph or most paragraphs, you know what it means. So sometimes it's a term, a definition. Sometimes it's an event. If I was writing a paper on the Patriot Act, I'd probably talk a little bit about 9/11 and what happened in our government right after. If I was writing something about World War II, I might write some specific history to go along with it. Like for instance, I remember one time specifically, I was writing about a character who survived a bombing, and I had to write a little bit about what the fire bombings of Dresden were because I thought it would make sense. So it can be terms, it can be a little bit of history, it can be introducing a movement. So like for instance, if you're writing something and it had Black Lives Matter in it and you wanted to explain what that movement is, like this would be a great time to do it. And think about it this way. If I don't understand what you're talking about, then I'm not going to understand your paper. So you need to give me these paragraphs at the beginning of your paper explaining the context, explaining the background. So I used to start a lot of my papers, and if I were writing more papers, I probably would continue to use this language, but I would use something akin to, before I explain why we shouldn't have smoking on campus, I first must explain the history of smoking on campus. I'm being very general, but still, trying to explain the background, the context, the term, the history, so that what comes next when I move into the argument section and the counter argument section, people understand what you're talking about. Right? So your argument section, right? And again, these are sections, so at most right now we're at 4 paragraphs. Your argument section is typically going to be between 2 to 5 paragraphs. I don't want to put a limit on it. It can be more, but if it's less, chances are you have not presented a very strong argument. Your thesis statement is an argument. It's not fact. Right? You're not writing a paper that people need to breathe. Like, okay, your paper's just over after that. Your argument has to be backed up with different points. If I'm going to say that jumping is cool and that you should do it, I'm hoping that the first question out of your mouth after that is, why? And then I have to give you reasons. So you can say arguments or even reasons. Next, we move into our counter arguments, and this again is typically going to be 2 to 4. It's usually a little bit smaller than our counter our arguments. We want to try and have more arguments in our favor than against us. So you might be asking me, Professor, why would I want to talk about the other side? Why would I want to give the other people an opportunity to discredit me in my paper? Well, the answer to that is, if you want to present a strong argument, you have to acknowledge the other side, and you have to then try and prove why they're wrong and you're right. For those of you who just write why it's good, something's good, and never acknowledge why it might be bad, I might be thinking as I'm reading, what are you hiding? It seems just too good to be true. Any argument is going to have counter arguments. So in the counter argument section, you typically try and do 2 things. You tell me what the counter arguments are, and you disprove those counter arguments. Extra information. 1 to 2 paragraphs. Notice too that I put an asterisk next to it. You don't need this. If you want to encourage somebody to do extra research, if you want to write a paragraph on what you think people should do next after they've read your paper, if you want to give some statistics of things that are going to happen moving forward that you think or that you've found, this can go there, right? It's information that is important to your reader. It's information that helps your argument, but it's not necessarily an argument for it. It's just information that is interesting and gets me thinking potentially about myself and how what you've argued affects me, or something along those lines. It could be even like an anecdotal story or something along those lines. Lastly, we have our conclusion. So that's going to be 1 paragraph, usually your smallest paragraph, even shorter than your introduction. So let's look on the smaller side, right? So if you're on the smaller side, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 paragraphs is probably not going to take you to 8 to 10 pages. If you're only doing 2 here, chances are you are rushing through what you are talking about. I would imagine that for most of you, you're gonna have to be doing 3 to 4 paragraphs, 1 to 2 paragraphs here, 3 to 4 paragraphs here, another 2 to 3 paragraphs here, probably 1 paragraph here, and another paragraph in your conclusion section to hit the page mark that you are looking for. I don't expect the arguments and counter arguments to be hard, because I'm expecting that you have done the research necessary in order to give yourself the arguments. I mean, not give yourself, but to help you formulate and develop the argument and arguments that you are going to be making. So this is a very abstract concept right now. What are my background paragraphs going to be about? What are my arguments? What are my not my counter arguments? What are the counter arguments? How do we begin to fill this out? For some of you, you can pretty much start writing. You have ideas in your head. You've been thinking about this stuff. You've been reading. You've been watching. Maybe you've been talking to some people. So for some of you, just sitting down, looking at this really generalized structure can help you to just start writing, and writing as much as you possibly can. For those of you who tried that and it didn't work, and you're just sitting there and it's a blank screen, or you're writing and erasing and then writing and erasing, I would recommend trying to develop an outline first. Imagine your next question to me is, well, how do I develop an outline? Very good question. So I'm going to combine these two documents when I'm done, but at least for right now, we'll just use the two. Okay, so for me, how I personally do it, it's going to be a 4-step process. I mean, there's a few sub-steps and ideas, but here we go. All right, so step 1, this is going to be the most important. We're going to make 3 lists. We're going to take our background section, we're going to take our argument section, and we're going to take our counter-argument section. For me, I usually just do bullets. I'll either write 3 columns on a piece of paper or use 3 separate pieces of paper. I personally like, when I'm planning or outlining, I like paper and pen, but feel free to use your iPads or your iPads or any other tablet, or feel free to use your computers, right? But for me personally, I like pen. Alright, so I'm going to make these 3 lists. Some people even do those webs where you would put background context in a circle and draw the little lines out from there. Not a big fan. Do you, however your brain works. There's are wrong ways to do it, but there's a lot of right ways to do it. So, background context, what information do people need to know to follow your paper and understand your argument, your thesis? Try and write as many things as possible. I know on the other document we were looking at, it says background context, 1, 2, or 3 things. But if you can write down 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, it's going to be better. Why? Because the more you have to look at, the more choices you have to make, the better off your choices are usually going to be. I mean, try not to have a million choices, because then you're never going to be able to make a choice, which will stink. So try and think about more than just 1 or 2. If you only have 1 or 2 things, then you're going to start writing about them, and then as you start writing, you might realize, maybe this isn't so great. So the more we think about now, the better off we're going to be in the long run, right? So write down all that stuff. List 2, your arguments. What points will you bring up in defense of your argument? Again, as I said above, and I will say again below, try and write down as much as you possibly can. By the time you are doing this outline, I'm hoping that you have a strong idea about what your working thesis statement is. Not your final thesis statement. We still got another 2 weeks to really develop it and refine it, but for right now, you should at least know what you're going to be arguing in general. And with that said, why are you arguing that? What are your points? What are your reasons? So if you can't think just off the bat like, oh, because of this, I mean, think about it this way. If you believe one thing, why do you believe it? Like, break it down for yourself. What are the things about it that make you believe in it, right? Unless you just believe things because you hear them and they sound nice, and then you really have nothing more to say. But I doubt that. Excuse me. Right, 3. Counter-arguments. As I mentioned before, any good argument has counter-arguments. The point of you talking about these counter-arguments is to bring light to what people are saying, and then to tell me what the other side says, and then to prove to me why they are wrong. By proving why they're wrong, it makes you seem a lot more right. It's going to make your thesis statement that much stronger. It's going to make your research paper that much stronger. Okay, so now that we have these 3 lists, we're going to break that information up using a hierarchical structure of main points, supporting ideas, and supporting details. Now, if you've looked at Journal 5 and you've started it, you'll notice how I asked you to do your outline of having having a 2-tier outline using your numbers and your letters. When you get really crazy into it, and when I say crazy into it, I mean that in a good way, you can even add a 3rd tier to it. So the first tier, numbers, represent the paragraph topic, what your paragraph is going to be about. So when I say tier, it pretty much means how this is. And I can change this to look the way it is supposed to look by doing that. Right, boom. Okay. So this is the topic, the topic sentence. This is what my paragraph is going to be about, and these are the things I'm going to talk about within the paragraph. Right. So this is what I've asked you to do. By starting to write this stuff down, it will help you to see what it is that you need to write about. So this actually isn't a step as much as an interesting idea of what you should do. So from this, what we really need to be doing is we need to be thinking about what it is that you want to do and how we're going to organize that into some sort of structure. For me, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle where the first time things seem like they fit, and then I have to rearrange it, and then I have to rearrange it, and move paragraphs around. But because you have an outline, you can actually see what it is that you are going to try and do. Having this allows you to make a lot more sense as you go through 8 to 10 pages of writing. I cannot stress to you enough the importance of having an outline, especially for a paper this big. If you want to make sense, if you want to be logical, if you want your readers to follow you, you cannot assume that you're going to be able to map this out on the fly as you're writing the first time. I don't know about you, but I've done that before. And typically every time I come back to my writing, I ask myself, the heck was I thinking? What was I writing? It makes no sense usually because your mind is most likely all over the place. And as a result, your writing is all over the place. So these outlines are incredibly, incredibly important. So I do hope this video helps a little bit. I hope the resources that I'm going to attach to this help even more. But lastly, practice. If this stuff doesn't make sense at first, it's fine. It's not supposed to. This is weird concepts and abstract ideas. But when you practice, it gets a lot easier and a lot easier and a lot easier to eventually where it gets to the point where you can outline stuff without pulling your hair out. Good luck, everybody. Please write if you have any issues. Let me know how I can help. We got about a little over a month left of time together, so let's finish up strong. Thanks.